A female truck driver is ridiculed by a group of wealthy young people because she is a woman driving a truck. When they discover her story, something surprising happens. A truck driver named Clark, a 35-year-old woman from Texas, becomes the target of mockery by a group of wealthy young men because she is a woman driving a truck. On a dark and silent night on a Texas road, and carefully drives her truck, thinking of her daughter Emily waiting at home. Suddenly, the quiet is shattered by the roar of a powerful engine. Through her rearview mirror, and spots a sports car speeding up behind her. Her heart races, anticipating trouble. The car draws closer, honking and flashing its headlights aggressively, and grips the steering wheel tightly, trying to stay calm, but in a blink, the car overtakes and cuts her off. In a desperate maneuver, and swerves to avoid a collision. Her truck skids off the road, coming to a harsh stop on the shoulder. Trembling and shocked, she tries to process the near miss. The sports car stops ahead, and a young man steps out, laughing loudly with his friends. It's Blake Harrison, the spoiled son of the town's wealthiest man. "Hey, Granny. Shouldn't you be in bed by now?" Blake jeers, staggering slightly, the air thick with the smell of alcohol, and confronts them, shaking, "You could have killed me. Look what you've done to my truck." Blake and his friends only laugh harder. "Chill out, old lady. It's not like this pile of junk is worth anything." And recalls countless similar insults at the gas station, targeted at her for being a female truck driver. Determined, she warns, "You're going to pay for this damage." Blake saunters over, his smug smile unwavering. "Oh yeah? And who's going to make us? You and your little truck?" Holding back tears, and reaches for her phone to call the police, but Blake dismisses her. "Let's go, guys. This old lady isn't worth our time." They drive off, leaving and alone with her damaged truck. She stares at the wreck, her heart sinking. The truck was her livelihood. How would she work now? How would she support Emily? With great effort, and manages to start the truck. The drive home feels endless, each mile a reminder of her uncertain future. Upon arriving, and finds Emily awake, waiting as always. Masking her fear, and lies about the delay, traffic was bad, dear, and urges Emily to sleep. Alone, and collapses on the sofa, gazing at a photo of her late husband. "What am I going to do now, John?" she whispers. The silence in the room is her only reply. Feeling defeated yet determined, and knows she cannot give up. For Emily, she must find a way, as she always has. With a weary sigh, and resolves to face another day. Another day to fight, another day to prove she is stronger than the obstacles before her. Even if, at that moment, she has no idea how. The sun had barely risen when and left the house, determined to find temporary work. With her truck in the shop, she urgently needed money. Emily was still asleep, unaware of the problems they faced. And walked through the city, knocking on door after door. At each place, the same story repeated itself. Skeptical looks, vague excuses, and doors closing. "Sorry, we don't have vacancies for someone like you," they said, barely hiding their prejudice. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Blake woke up with a terrible hangover. His night had been a blur of parties and drinks, as usual. The accident with Anne? He hardly remembered it. "Blake, there's another party tonight," shouted one of his friends over the phone. Blake smiled, ignoring the headache. Life was good when you had money and no worries. Back on the streets, and was about to give up when she saw an ad in a storefront window. housekeeper needed Harrison Mansion. Her heart raced. It wasn't the job of her dreams, but it would pay the bills. Without a second thought, and went to the mansion. The interview was quick, and to her surprise, she was hired on the spot. What she didn't know was that this was the home of Blake's family. The next day, and arrived early for her first day. She was nervous but grateful for the opportunity. As she cleaned the living room, she heard footsteps approaching. "What are you doing here?" a familiar and hostile voice asked. And turned around and found Blake standing in the doorway with a look of shock and anger. I work here now," and stammered, equally surprised. Blake immediately went to look for his father, Richard. "Dad, you have to fire her. She's that woman from the truck, remember?" Richard listened to his son with a weary expression. "Blake, we need a housekeeper. She was fairly hired and she's going to stay." Frustrated, Blake stormed out. And, who had overheard everything, felt a mix of relief and worry. Later that day, while cleaning the upstairs rooms, and met Zoe, Blake's younger sister. The girl was sitting in her wheelchair, looking out the window. "Hi, I'm Ann," she said kindly. Zoe turned around, a shy smile on her face. "Hi, Ann. You're new here, right?" The two started chatting, and Ann soon realized that Zoe had a condition similar to Emily's. Her heart filled with compassion. Blake, passing through the hallway, stopped when he saw the scene. He was surprised by Ann's kindness to his sister. For a moment, his hostility waned. Later, Ann was finishing cleaning the office when she heard raised voices approaching. It was Blake and his father, Richard. "You need to grow up, Blake," Richard yelled. "You can't keep living off parties and irresponsibility. You don't understand anything about my life." Blake shot back, furious. Without thinking, and stepped out of the office, running into the two of them. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, embarrassed. Richard and Blake stared at her, surprised. Then, to everyone's amazement, including her own, Ann spoke. "Mr. Harrison, sometimes young people need time to find their way. I'm sure Blake will figure out what he wants from life." The silence that followed was deafening. Blake looked at Ann, confused. Richard seemed unsure how to react. And Ann, realizing what she had done, wished she could disappear at that moment. In the days that followed, Blake began to see Ann differently. He watched her as she worked, impressed by her dedication. And arrived early, worked hard all day, and still rushed out to care for Emily. One morning, Blake saw her in the garden, talking on the phone. "Yes, darling, I know it's hard. Mommy will try to come home early today, okay?" Ann's voice was soft, filled with love. Blake felt something strange in his chest. Admiration, perhaps? And, in turn, struggled to balance everything. She woke up before sunrise, prepared Emily for school, hurried to the mansion, worked all day, and still tried to be home in time to help Emily with her homework. As the days passed, Blake and Ann began to have more contact. Initially, their encounters were tense, filled with uncomfortable silences. But gradually, something began to change. "How is Zoe today?" Ann asked one day, breaking the ice. Blake, surprised by her genuine interest, replied, "She's fine. Actually, she keeps talking about you." A small smile emerged between them, like the first ray of sun after a long storm. It was Zoe who suggested that Emily come to visit. "It would be nice to have someone my age to talk to," she said. and hesitated, but eventually agreed. On the day of the visit, and brought Emily to the mansion. The two girls got along instantly, laughing and chatting like old friends. Blake and Ann found themselves forced to spend more time together, supervising the girls. "Your daughter is incredible," Blake commented, watching Emily and Zoe play. And smiled, proud. "Thank you. Zoe is a special girl too." As he watched and with the girls, Blake began to question his own lifestyle. Here was a woman who worked hard, cared for a daughter with special needs, and still had time to be kind to everyone. And him? What was he doing with his life? And, in turn, began to see beyond Blake's wealthy playboy facade. She noticed how his eyes softened when he spoke with Zoe, how he seemed lost at times, as if searching for a purpose. One day, Blake's friends showed up at the mansion. They were shocked to see Blake chatting amiably with Ann. "Man, what are you doing?" one of them asked. "She's just the housekeeper. Put her in her place." Blake felt a wave of anger. "She has a name. It's Ann. And she deserves respect." His friends were speechless. "You're defending her? What happened to you, Blake?" "Maybe I'm growing up," Blake responded, surprising even himself. After the friends left, furious, and found Blake alone in the garden. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to defend me." Blake looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't name. "I did. They were wrong. I was wrong. About many things." At that moment, something changed between them. The barriers fell, and for the first time, they had a real conversation. And spoke about her fears, about the daily struggle to raise Emily alone. Blake confessed his feeling of emptiness, the pressure to be someone he wasn't. As night fell, they sat side by side, a comfortable silence between them. And Blake suddenly said, "Your truck. I can help fix it." And looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to," Blake interrupted. "Please, let me help." And hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Blake." As they walked back to the house, something new was blooming between them. A friendship? Or perhaps something more. The days that followed brought a new routine for Ann and Blake. After work at the mansion, they met in the garage to work on Ann's truck. Blake, surprisingly skilled in mechanics, taught Ann about the parts and repairs. "Hand me the screwdriver," Blake requested, lying under the truck. Their fingers brushed as Ann handed over the tool, sending shivers through both of them. Despite their attempts to ignore it, the romantic tension grew each day. Lingering looks, shy smiles, excuses to accidentally touch each other. It was like a silent dance neither knew how to lead. Meanwhile, in town, Blake's old friends weren't keeping quiet. Nasty rumors about Ann began to circulate. "She's hitting on the boss's son," some said. "She's planning a gold-digging scam," others whispered. And began to feel the growing hostility. At the supermarket, people avoided her. At work, other employees treated her coldly. Even at Emily's school, she noticed judgmental stares from other parents. One day, at the gas station, and heard derogatory comments directly. "Hey, housekeeper. Caught yourself a rich man," a man shouted. Before Ann could react, Blake appeared. "Apologize to her." Now, Blake demanded, his voice cold with anger. The man, taken aback, stuttered an apology and quickly left. This incident only fueled more gossip. The whole town was talking about how young Harrison was defending the housekeeper. At home, Emily noticed the changes in her mother and seemed happier, lighter, yet also more distracted. "Mom, you're different," Emily remarked one night. "Is it because of your new job?" Caught off guard and tried to play it off. "No, dear. Everything's normal." But it wasn't. And it wasn't just Emily who noticed. At the mansion, Richard Harrison observed the growing closeness between his son and with alarm. He saw the looks, the whispered conversations, the time they spent together in the garage. One night, he confronted Blake. "Son, what's going on between you and the housekeeper?" "Her name is and Dad," Blake responded defensively. "And we're just friends." But were they really? And wasn't sure anymore. The situation was becoming too complicated. Maybe it was better to leave the job, return to her normal life. When and mentioned this possibility to Blake, he panicked. "No, and please," he pleaded. "Don't leave. I need you here." The tone of his voice, the intensity of his gaze, made Anne's heart race. It was in that moment of vulnerability that it happened. They were close, so close. Blake's eyes dropped to Anne's lips. She felt her breath falter. Slowly, they leaned toward each other. Their lips were millimeters apart when a noise startled them. They quickly pulled apart, as if shocked. I need to go," and stammered, fleeing the garage. Blake stayed behind, running his hand through his hair, frustrated and confused. That night, neither could sleep. And tossed in bed, guilty and frightened by the intensity of her feelings. How could she be falling for someone so much younger, so different from her? Blake, in his luxurious room, stared at the ceiling, thinking about Anne. About her smile, her strength, her kindness. How had he never noticed women like her before? Both knew they were venturing into dangerous territory. An impossible, forbidden love. But how to fight against something that felt so right, so inevitable? With dawn, one certainty, nothing would be the same. And the future, once so clear, now was a big question mark. The days that followed were a test of self-control for Anne and Blake. Each glance, each accidental touch, carried a weight of unspoken emotions. At work, they kept their distance, but their eyes often met, filled with desire and guilt. Meanwhile, Blake's old friends had not forgotten the betrayal. Gathered in a local bar, they plotted. "We'll catch them red-handed," one said. "I bet they're having an affair. We just need proof." At the Harrison mansion, Richard was increasing the pressure on Blake. "Son, it's time for you to take responsibility in the company," he insisted. "No more fooling around. You need to grow up." Blake listened, but his mind was on Anne. How could he focus on business when his heart was so conflicted? One day, Anne received an unexpected call. It was a major transportation company offering her a job as a truck driver. The salary was excellent, but it would mean leaving the city. Anne was torn. It was the opportunity she had always dreamed of, but the idea of leaving Blake left her distressed. When she mentioned the offer to Blake, she saw panic in his eyes. "You can't go," he said, more sharply than he intended. That night, driven by fear of losing Anne, Blake did something he never imagined. He called the company and, using his family's influence, managed to have the offer withdrawn. The next day, Anne received the news that the position had been filled. She was disappointed but secretly relieved not to have to make a tough decision. Zoe, always observant, noticed changes in her brother's behavior. One day, she confronted him. "You like Anne, don't you?" she asked directly. Caught off guard, Blake tried to deny it, but Zoe smiled. "It's okay, little brother. Your secret is safe with me." At school, Emily was having a tough time. Rumors about her mother had spread, and some classmates were cruel. "Your mom is a gold digger," some said. "She just wants the Harrisons' money," others taunted. Emily came home crying almost every day, leaving Anne desperate and guilty. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, Anne decided to confront Blake. She found him in the garage, working on the truck. "Blake, we need to talk," she said, her voice slightly trembling. Blake dropped the tool, facing her. "About what?" "About this. Us. What's happening between us?" The conversation that followed was intense and emotional. They both expressed their fears, their doubts, the guilt they felt. But also, for the first time, they admitted their feelings for each other. "I know it's wrong," Blake said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Anne." And felt tears in her eyes. "Me neither, Blake. And that scares me so much." At that moment, all barriers fell. Blake stepped forward, holding Anne's face between his hands. Slowly, their lips met in a passionate and long-suppressed kiss. The world seemed to stop. Nothing else mattered beyond that moment, that kiss. But they were not alone. Hidden in the shadows of the garden, someone watched. The soft click of a camera broke the silence of the night, capturing the forbidden kiss. And then Blake separated, breathless and stunned by the intensity of the moment, unaware that their secret was no longer just theirs. The future, already uncertain, had just become much more complicated. Morning broke with a bang for Anne and Blake. Photos of their kiss, secretly taken the night before, were everywhere on social media, on cell phones, even on the front page of the local newspaper. The scandal exploded like a powder keg. And woke to her phone ringing nonstop. Messages, calls, all asking about her affair with the young Harrison. Her heart sank as she saw the photos. "My God, how did this happen?" And murmured, her hands trembling as she held her phone. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Emily, wake up, dear. We have a problem." Emily entered the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "What's wrong, Mom? Why is everyone messaging?" And hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation to her daughter. "Remember when I told you that sometimes people make nasty gossip? Well, it seems someone took some photos of Mommy with Mr. Blake and now everyone is talking about it." Emily's eyes widened. "But that's bad, isn't it?" And hugged her daughter, tears forming in her eyes. "It'll be all right, dear. We are strong, remember? We'll get through this together." At the Harrison mansion, the situation was no better. Richard, furious, confronted Blake in his office. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he yelled, throwing the newspaper on the table. "A housekeeper? Have you lost your mind?" Blake, for the first time in his life, didn't back down. He stood up, facing his father. "I love her, Dad. And is amazing, and I'm not giving up on her." "Love?" Richard scoffed. "You know nothing about love, boy. This is just puppy love that will ruin your life and the name of our family." No, Dad. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want. And makes me want to be a better person. Richard turned red with anger, pounding his fist on the table. If you don't end it with her now, you're disinherited. Understand? Everything I've worked for, everything I've built, you're going to throw away for a maid? Blake felt his anger rising. Maybe I don't want any of it, Dad. Maybe I want to build my own life with someone who loves me for who I am, not for my last name or bank account. Meanwhile, and arrived at the mansion, feeling the accusatory glances from everyone. The housekeeper approached her coldly. Miss Clark, she said, her tone as sharp as ice. Your services are no longer needed. Gather your things and leave. Immediately. And felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Please, Mrs. Thompson, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. The housekeeper raised an eyebrow. No need to explain, dear. The photos speak for themselves. Now, please, don't make this harder than it already is. With tears in her eyes, and collected her belongings, feeling the weight of the stairs and whispers around her. Accusations of being a gold digger followed her everywhere. At the supermarket, on the street, even in church. And felt suffocated by everyone's judgment. At school, Emily's situation worsened drastically. Hey, Emily, a classmate yelled during break. Your mom's a slut. She just wants the Harrisons' money. Emily ran to the bathroom, crying. Zoe, seeing her friend's distress, followed her. Emily? Are you there? Zoe called softly. Between sobs, Emily replied, Why are they being so mean, Zoe? My mom didn't do anything wrong. Zoe hugged her friend. I know, Emily. People can be cruel when they don't understand things. But I'm here for you, okay? Later, Zoe tried to defend Emily in front of the other students. Leave her alone. You don't know anything. Her mom is a good person. This only escalated the tension in the Harrison family. Richard forbade Zoe from seeing Emily, causing a major fight at home. Dad, you can't stop me from being friends with Emily. Zoe yelled. She needs me now more than ever. Richard retorted, I'm your father, and you will do what I say. That family only brings trouble. Blake, seeing everything falling apart, decided to take a stand. He confronted his father again, this time in front of the entire family. Enough! Blake shouted. I love and I'm staying with her, whether you like it or not. If that means losing my inheritance, so be it. At least I'll have something money can't buy, true love. The silence that followed was deafening. The Harrison family had never seen Blake assert himself this way. As chaos unfolded and made a shocking discovery. After days of nausea and fatigue, a pregnancy test confirmed her suspicions. She was expecting Blake's baby. And stared at the test, her world spinning. No, no, no. This can't be happening, she whispered, falling to her knees in the bathroom. Panic consumed her. How could she have a baby amid this scandal? How would she raise 2 children alone? To make matters worse, Blake's former friends spread rumors that the pregnancy was a trap. Did you hear? Whispered a girl to another at the local cafe. They say the housekeeper's pregnant. I bet she planned all this to get the Harrisons' money. And found herself cornered. The whole town seemed to be against her. Emily was suffering. And now, a baby on the way. one night, sitting in the kitchen with Emily, and made a painful decision. "Emily, dear," and began, her voice trembling. "What do you think about us leaving here? Starting over somewhere else?" Emily looked at her mother, her eyes filled with sadness and understanding beyond her years. "Where would we go, Mom?" "I don't know yet, love. But to a place where we can start over, where no one knows us." Emily was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, Mom. As long as we're together. You, me, and..." She hesitated, looking at Anne's stomach, and hugged her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, dear. The three of us." Blake, for his part, was torn. His love for Anne was real and deep, but the pressure from his family and society was overwhelming. "And, please, answer the phone," he murmured, after another failed attempt to call her. "We can work this out together. I love you." And made her decision. She would pack her things and leave town in the dead of night. It was better this way, she thought. Better for everyone. With a heavy heart, and wrote a letter to Blake. "Dear Blake," she began, tears staining the paper. "When you read this, I will have already left. It's better this way, for all of us. Please, don't look for me. Be happy, live the life your parents dreamed for you. I will always love you, but sometimes love isn't enough. With love, Anne." She hesitated, the pen hovering over the paper, considering whether to mention the pregnancy. But in the end, she decided not to. Some truths were too painful to be spoken. That night, as the city slept, and Emily loaded the car. With one last look at the house that had been their home, they set off for the unknown. And placed her hand on her belly, feeling the weight of her secrets. "We'll be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the baby she carried. "We have to be." Emily, sitting in the passenger seat, took her mother's free hand. "We're in this together, Mom. The three of us against the world." And smiled through her tears, squeezing Emily's hand. "Yes, dear. The three of us against the world." And so, under the cover of darkness, and left, leaving behind a sleeping Blake, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The future was uncertain, but Anne knew that, with love and courage, they would find their way. Dawn brought a discovery that shook Millbrook. And Emily had left during the night, leaving only a letter addressed to Blake. The paper trembled in his hands as he read Anne's farewell words. "Blake, I can no longer live this lie. Emily and I need a new start. Please, do not try to find us. Goodbye." Blake's world crumbled. The reality of his actions hit him like a punch in the stomach. For the first time, he truly understood the impact of his selfish choices. In the days that followed, Blake wandered around the town like a ghost. Every corner reminded him of Anne and Emily. The park where they played, the diner where they had ice cream on Sundays. Everything now was a painful reminder of what he had lost. Richard watched the change in his son with a mix of concern and reflection. Seeing Blake suffering, he began to question his own actions. Had he been too harsh? Too controlling? A week after Anne's departure, Zoe sought out Blake. Her eyes were red from crying. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice trembling. Anne was pregnant. The word struck Blake like lightning. A baby. His child. The news intensified his remorse and sparked a fierce determination in him. Meanwhile, miles away, and struggled to rebuild her life. In an unfamiliar city, she faced the pregnancy alone, torn between fear of the future and hope for a new beginning. Emily, although trying to adapt to the new life, deeply missed Zoe. At night, alone in her new room, the girl secretly blamed the unborn baby for having to leave everything behind. Back in Millbrook, Blake began a personal transformation. For the first time in his life, he took on real responsibilities. He got a job, started helping in the community. People noticed the change, surprised by the new Blake. His old friends, those who had previously encouraged his wild ways, watched his transformation with a mix of astonishment and reflection. Some began to rethink their own attitudes, inspired by Blake's change. As the days turned into weeks, Blake's determination grew. He knew he needed to find and, to explain, to beg for forgiveness if necessary. He wanted to be part of his children's lives, Emily and the baby on the way. One night, Blake confronted his parents. "I'm going to look for and," he announced, his voice firm. Richard and his wife exchanged worried glances. "Blake, maybe it's best to let her go," his mother argued. But Blake was resolute. "I can't. I need to fix this. I need to be the man that and my kids deserve." Blake woke up the morning after and left with a sense of emptiness he had never experienced before. Reading the letter she left behind, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He would find her, no matter the cost. Without a word to his parents, Blake got in his car and set off. City after city, he searched for and Emily. In each place, he was met with closed doors and suspicious glances. "We don't know anyone by that name," was the most common response. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, and was facing her own challenges. Her pregnancy was proving difficult. Constant nausea, high blood pressure, and the ever-present fear of going through this journey alone. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily frequently asked, concern evident in her eyes. And managed a smile. "I'm fine, dear. Just a bit tired." Fortunately, they weren't completely alone. The neighbors in the small apartment they rented were kind and welcoming. An elderly lady, Mrs. Clara, took Emily under her wing, helping her with homework while unrested. Blake, determined to make a difference while searching for and began to use his resources in unexpected ways. In each city he passed through, he started support programs for single mothers and children with special needs. "If I can't help and Emily directly," he thought, "at least I can help others like them." His search and actions began to attract media attention. Newspapers and TV programs talked about the philanthropic heir in search of lost love. Opinions were divided. Some saw him as a romantic hero, others as a playboy trying to clean up his image. And, now 6 months pregnant, saw one of these reports on the TV in her tiny living room. Her heart raced as she saw Blake's face. He looked different. More mature, more determined. "What are you doing, Blake?" she whispered to the screen, fighting the urge to call him. At the Harrison mansion, Richard watched the changes in his son with a mix of pride and regret. The once irresponsible young man had transformed into a man with purpose. "Perhaps I judged the situation too harshly," he admitted to his wife one night. Zoe, who had been secretly in touch with Emily via messages, was increasingly eager to reunite the couple. One afternoon, unable to keep the secret any longer, she told Blake where and was. Blake wasted no time. He drove through the night, determined to reach in. What he didn't know was that fate had other plans. When he finally arrived in the town where Anne was, he found a scene of chaos. And had gone into premature labor 2 months early. Blake arrived at the small apartment just as Emily, in panic, was calling for help from the neighbors. "Blake?" Emily exclaimed, shocked to see him. "Mom, the baby, we need help." Without hesitation, Blake rushed inside. And was on the floor of the living room, pale and frightened. "Blake," she whispered, barely believing her eyes. "What? How?" "Shoo, it's all okay now," he said, lifting her into his arms. "I'm here and I'm never leaving you again." Rushing to his car, with Anne in his arms and Emily close behind, Blake promised himself he would make everything right this time. "Hold on," he said, speeding toward the hospital. "We'll make it. Together." And so, under the starry sky of an unfamiliar town, a new chance for love and redemption opened for Blake and Anne. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, there was hope in the air. The hospital was in an uproar when Blake arrived carrying Anne, with Emily right behind them. Doctors and nurses rushed to assist them, quickly taking Anne to the delivery room. "I want him to stay," Anne said weakly, pointing to Blake. The doctor nodded, and Blake, hurriedly donning sterile attire, entered the room. The following hours were intense. Anne bravely fought through her labor, while Blake held her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Finally, the cry of a newborn filled the room. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the baby in Anne's arms. Blake looked at mother and daughter, tears in his eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The moment of peace was disrupted by the abrupt arrival of the Harrison family. Richard, his wife, and Zoe burst into the room, followed by Emily. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, his face red with anger. Blake positioned himself protectively in front of Anne and the baby. "Dad, please, this is neither the time nor the place for this." But Richard was furious. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" he accused Anne. "You got pregnant on purpose to take our money." And, exhausted and emotional, felt tears streaming down her face. Blake, outraged, defended her passionately. "How dare you? And is the most incredible woman I've ever met. She doesn't need our money, she just needs love and respect." Unable to take it anymore, Emily burst out, "Stop. Don't you see what you're doing? Ever since this all started, my life has been hell. At school, everyone teases me. We had to move, leave everything behind. And now you're fighting on the day my little sister was born?" Silence fell over the room. Zoe approached Emily, embracing her. "She's right. This has to stop." At that moment, the noise from outside caught everyone's attention. The media had discovered Blake and Anne's location, and now a crowd of reporters surrounded the hospital. Gathering strength she didn't know she had, and sat up in bed. "Enough," she said, her voice firm despite her fatigue. "You want the truth? Here it is." She then revealed everything. About her struggles as a single mother, how she met Blake, about her fears and hopes. She spoke of the love that grew between them, unexpected and uncontrollable. "I ran because I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of what everyone would say, afraid I wasn't good enough for Blake. But now I know that true love is stronger than any fear." Moved by Anne's words, Blake turned to face his family and, through the windows, the media cameras. "I've made many mistakes in the past," he declared. "I was irresponsible, immature. but and showed me what really matters in life. I love her, I love Emily, and I love our daughter. And I won't give up on them, no matter what happens. At that moment, to everyone's surprise, Blake's former friends entered the room. They had seen the news and came running. "Blake, man, we were idiots," one of them said. "We've come to apologize. To you and to Ann." The room fell silent, everyone processing what was happening. Then, to everyone's surprise, Richard stepped forward. His face, previously hard, now showed signs of emotion. "Son," he said, his voice choked. "Ann, I was wrong. I see now how much you've changed, Blake. And I judged you unfairly. Can we try again? As a family?" Blake and Ann looked at each other, a mix of surprise and hope in their eyes. The baby in Ann's arms let out a small whimper, as if sealing the moment. "Maybe," Ann said softly. "One step at a time." Blake nodded, embracing Ann and the baby. "A new beginning," he whispered. "For all of us." And so, in that hospital room, surrounded by family, friends, and the buzz of the media outside, a new story began to be written. A story of forgiveness, of love, and of second chances. 6 months had passed since that dramatic day at the hospital. And in Blake's lives had changed completely, but in a way neither could have imagined. On a sunny Saturday morning, Ann woke to the sound of laughter coming from the backyard. She smiled, recognizing the voices of Emily and Zoe playing with Little Hope, the name chosen for their daughter, symbolizing the hope she brought into their lives. Blake entered the room, carrying a breakfast tray. "Good morning, my love," he said, kissing her gently. "Good morning," Ann replied, still marveling at the life they were building together. That afternoon, they had an important event, the official inauguration of the Harrison Clark Foundation. Blake had used a large part of his inheritance to create this organization dedicated to supporting non-traditional families and children with special needs. "Nervous?" Ann asked, adjusting Blake's tie. "A little," he admitted. "But with you by my side, I know I can do anything." The event was a success. The community, which initially looked at the couple skeptically, now applauded them. And, dressed in her trucker uniform, spoke about the new training program she was leading for women in the profession. "It doesn't matter where you come from or what obstacles you face," she told the audience. "With determination and support, you can achieve your dreams." Blake, in turn, spoke about the importance of second chances and looking beyond appearances. His former friends, now dedicated volunteers at the foundation, nodded proudly. Richard and his wife were in the front row, Hope in her grandfather's lap. The transformation in Richard was notable. He now spent his days spoiling his grandchildren, including Emily, who finally felt she had a complete family. After the event, everyone gathered at Ann and Blake's new home for a family barbecue. Zoe and Emily ran around the backyard, organizing the last things for the support group they had created for siblings of children with special needs. "Who would have thought we'd all be here like this?" Blake's mother commented, watching the scene with a smile. And then Blake exchanged a knowing look. Of course, not everything was perfect. They still faced challenges as a couple and as parents. There were sleepless nights with Hope, arguments about balancing work and family, and the occasional sideways glances from people who didn't understand their story. But with every obstacle, they grew stronger. Their love, tested by so many trials, was now stronger than ever. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday to Hope, who was turning 1, the whole family gathered around the cake. Emily helped her little sister blow out the candle as everyone applauded and looked around at the smiling faces. Her eldest daughter, once so lonely, now surrounded by love. Her baby, a symbol of a new beginning. Blake, the man who had changed her life in so many ways. And all the others, Richard, Zoe, friends who had become an essential part of their unconventional family. Later, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, and Blake sat on the porch, looking at the stars. "Do you regret anything?" Blake asked, holding Anne's hand. She thought for a moment. "Not for a second," she replied. "Every challenge has brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Blake pulled her close, kissing her under the starry sky. "I love you, and Clark. Thank you for giving me a chance, for teaching me what really matters in life." "I love you too," Blake Harrison, and responded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for never giving up on us." There, on that quiet night, and Blake silently reaffirmed their love and commitment. Their story was living proof that true love can overcome any obstacle, prejudices, social differences, and even our own fears. And as the night wore on, they knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As a family. As a team. As two hearts that, against all odds, found their place in each other. I hope you enjoyed Anne and Blake's emotional story, a journey of overcoming, love, and new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends so they can be moved as well. And, of course, we really want to know what you thought. Leave your comment and suggestions so we can continue bringing stories that inspire and move you. See you next time.